recording right now, so it's going on YouTube. No one can see you unless you're online, but they will be able to hear you. Okay, so we just finished the Gospel of Matthew chapter 9 last week, and we're going to be starting on the Gospel of Matthew chapter 10. Remember, we said the way the Gospel of Matthew is a biography of Jesus, so it's a story about Jesus' life. It's the first one that was written, at least according to tradition, written by Matthew, the disciple, the tax collector, whose calling we read in one of the previous chapters. And it's divided up in a certain way. So we said that the Gospel of Matthew, it alternates between big chunks of Jesus' teaching and then big chunks of Jesus' activity. So the Sermon on the Mount was chapters 5 through 7. It was just a whole lot of Jesus' ethical teachings. Then we just did chapters 8 and 9, where Jesus, after he finished the Sermon on the Mount, he went around to the various towns of Galilee, and he healed people, and he performed miracles, and so on and so forth. Now, as we enter into chapter 10, we're going back into a block of teaching. So what Jesus is going to tell us in this chapter, spoiler, is going to be the Sermon on the Mount in chapters 5 through 7 was a lot of Jesus' ethical teachings. It was about how to behave. Remember, we said he was extending the law so that not only should you not commit adultery, but you shouldn't even lust. Not only should you not kill, but you shouldn't even be angry. And so that was just more baseline morality. This set of teachings is more specifically going to concern the ministers of the church, or the leaders within the church, and the ministers of the gospel, but it's relevant for all Christians. Okay, so just as a reminder, when we finished up the Gospel of Matthew chapter 9, Jesus's last statement was, "But when he saw the multitudes, he was moved with compassion for them, because they were weary and scattered like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, 'The harvest truly is plentiful, and the laborers are few. Therefore pray to the Lord of harvest to send out laborers into his harvest.'" So remember, he's looking at the world, all people, as his harvest. You know, he planted us on this earth so that we could grow to maturity, that is to say spiritual maturity, and bring forth fruit, that is to say the virtues that he can enjoy from us. So that's the whole reason for the existence of the world. This God is growing us so that he can harvest us ultimately and take us into his barn, which of course is the kingdom of heaven. And then he said, pray to the Lord of the harvest, that he will send out laborers into his harvest. And then immediately, without praying, he starts to send out laborers. So notice, that's just another subtle hint that Jesus is God. He tells you to pray to the Lord of the harvest, and then he is the one who ends up doing the sending. So he is implying that he himself is the Lord of the harvest. Of course, he displays his divine identity more clearly in other parts of the gospel, but that is like a very interesting little hint, I think. Okay. So now, and when he called his 12 disciples to him, he gave them power over unclean spirits, to cast them out and to heal all kinds of sickness and all kinds of disease. Now the names of the 12 apostles are these: first Simon, who is called Peter, and Andrew his brother, James the son of Zebedee, and John his brother, Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthew the tax collector, James the son of Alphaeus and Lebbaeus, whose surname was Thaddeus, Simon the Canaanite, and Judas Iscariot, who also betrayed him. Okay, so what's going on here? So he's naming his 12 apostles. What does apostle mean? Anyone with a handle on Greek want to say that? Yes.
Like a disciple?
Kind of. They're related, but no, they're not identical. Yes. Messenger. Yes. An apostle is someone who's sent out. So apostelno in Greek just means I send something out. So the apostles are the ones who are sent out. And so it's important. All of the apostles of Jesus Christ are also disciples, but not all disciples are apostles. So a disciple just means a student. Mathitis in Greek, or mathitria. So the women disciples of the Lord were disciples, but they weren't apostles. Now they do have the title equal to the apostles. So we call Saint Mary Magdalene is apostoli, equal to the apostles, but she was not an apostle in the strict formal sense. She was not part of the two groups of apostles that Jesus sent out, while the 12 and the 70. We'll get more into that. So he sends out 12 disciples, and one of the things I should mention is there are these like kind of concentric rings in Jesus's discipleship. So Jesus has 12 disciples and apostles who are like his most trusted men. But within them, as we see in other parts of the gospel, there's actually an even tighter group of 3 apostles, and that's Peter, John, and James, who are his more closest disciples, who are, his closest confidants. They're the ones who get to see the transfiguration. They're the ones he calls on in the Garden of Gethsemane. and so on. So there is this hierarchy, and even more broadly, as we know from the Gospel of Luke, there's actually an additional group of 70 apostles that get sent out, that are somewhat lesser in honor. But so there's a group of 12 apostles and a group of 70 apostles. I actually don't know if the two groups overlap. Like are the 12 part of the 70? Or are they two totally separate groups? I can't remember. I don't know, to be honest. But there are these two distinct groups. Do we know why? Does anyone want to venture a guess why 12 and why 70? Who's really been reading the book of Genesis? Let's separate the true believers from the fake Christians. Yes.
Well, I do know that the 12 represents 12 tribes of Israel.
Good. You're halfway there. The 12 disciples, one for each of the 12 tribes of Israel. 70 nations. John J. Westenberger. Yes, let's hear from you.
There, the mic is on. The 70, wouldn't that be for the 70 elders that God took the Spirit from Moses and distributed to the elders to help them out?
That's a really good guess. Not quite.
Oh, well.
But that's
so much for that.
No, that's fantastic. When Moses goes up the Mount Sinai, yes, he takes a group of 70 elders with him that go like kind of halfway up, I believe. It's a really great use of the biblical number 70. No one else. 70 nations. So in the book of Genesis, when it lists through the big genealogies, there were 70 nations. So Luke's, remember Matthew, we've said in the past, Matthew's gospel is more focused on Jesus' evangelism to the Jews, because Matthew was himself a Jew. Luke's gospel is more, because Luke was a Gentile, was more focused on the radiation outward of the message to the Gentiles. So he includes the detail that Jesus named 12 apostles for the 12 tribes of Israel, and then 70 for the 70 nations of the world. Of course, in reality, there are more nations than that, but it was a symbolic number, meaning the entirety of the world. And of course, the 12 apostles end up going out to all the nations as well, right? Even Peter dies in Rome, Andrew dies in Greece, and so on and so forth. But just this number is relevant. And it kind of symbolizes Jesus's desire to claim the whole world. I mean, that's what he's sending them out to do. He's going to take everyone into his church, because he's here to save the entire world. And he gave them power over unclean spirits to cast them out and to heal all kinds of sickness and all kinds of disease.
Yeah.
What has Jesus been doing these last two chapters we read, for those of you who've been here?
He's been going around performing miracles.
He's been going around healing all kinds of sickness and all kinds of disease and casting out unclean spirits. What he's doing right now is he's extending his work in and through the apostles. And remember, the apostles are the original bishops of what we now call the Orthodox Church. So you can, when you read this, don't just read this in isolation, like, oh, okay, that was the apostles back then. Read that as about the Orthodox Church now, because we are living in a continuation of what the apostles were doing. The work of the apostles, the work of the church, is an extension of Jesus Christ's ministry to cast out demons, to heal all kinds of sickness and all kinds of disease among the people. Of course, now the church focuses obviously much more on spiritual healing, which we've always said is the most important kind of healing. But of course, the church has been very actively involved in physical healing as well, right? I mean, the first hospitals, what we now call hospitals, were established by St. Basil the Great. And there have been a lot of medical saints and so on and so forth, not to mention, numerous medical miracles that happen within the walls of the church. But still, the church is the extension of Jesus Christ's work on earth. Why? Because the church is his body, right? The body is the part of you that does the actions. The mind or the soul is what thinks and what animates the body, but it's the body that does the work. Likewise, we as Christ's body are doing the work. He's the soul that animates everything. But yeah. Okay, now the names of the 12 apostles are these. First, Simon was called Peter, Andrew's brother, James, the son of Zebedee, and John. And so what's one reason why Matthew would want to give a list of the names of all the apostles? After all, not even all of these apostles get a speaking role in the Gospels.
For like records for like succession and stuff.
That's an interesting one. Yeah, records for succession. Yeah, that's probably relevant. And it's just tied in more generally to the problem of naming the authentic apostles. We know from Paul's letter that there were frauds going around. Like once Jesus's name starts to have a lot of cachet, like once Jesus becomes popular, a lot of imitators pop up. A lot of people, that's how we get all these different kinds of sects in the early sects, sects, in the early in the early church that were trying to say, oh no, we preserve the authentic teachings of Jesus. That's what the Gnostics were claiming. They said, oh no, what those apostles are preaching, that was just the outer message. We have the hidden secret message that Jesus revealed just to us. So there were a lot of fake apostles going around in the immediate history of Christianity. And so it was important in the early church to be able to trace yourself back to an apostle. And that's where this whole concept that we have of in the Orthodox Church of apostolicity comes from. Like, you had to have credentials, and you had to have letters of recommendation, and you had to be able to prove that you were coming from the real source, because that mattered. Yeah. Okay. So this is a list of who is legit and who's not legit. If you can't trace yourself back to one of these apostles, there's a problem. And you're not necessarily speaking truly in the name of Christ or truly in the name of the church. Now, keep in mind, the names are somewhat variable between this list and like Luke's list or whatever. And you can see it right here. Simon also has the name Peter. Lebbaeus, whose surname was Thaddeus. People went by multiple names back then. Remember, no one's walking around with an ID card at this point in time. Names are a bit of a fluid thing. Not a totally fluid thing. Like, people aren't changing names the way they're changing hats, but people called you different things in different contexts. Simon was his Hebrew name, and Peter was his Greek name. Probably the situation for a lot of these. I think Bartholomew was the one that's also known as Nathaniel. Lebbaeus, who we have, at least in mine, it says Lebbaeus, but his name was also Judas, or Jude. And so you have multiple names for these people, and that's just kind of how things worked back then. But there was one original core of 12 disciples. And notice how he also sends them out in pairs. That's just how he distributes them to do this work. I actually don't remember reading any specific reason for why he chose to do it this way and not another way, but he sends the disciples out in pairs. So, Peter and Andrew, who is his blood brother. But Peter's listed first, obviously, because he is the leader of the apostles. And that's an interesting point. I mean, Peter was the leader of the apostles. He wasn't, and the Pope is the successor of Peter. He wasn't a monarchical leader the way that modern Pope is in the Catholic Church. We'd say they deviated from the original church, but there was in the original church this sense of kind of Petrine primacy, again, in a much softer sense than the Catholics take it to be now. We say they've deviated completely. And that, now declaring the Pope is infallible and then kind of walking that back, but not really. But that was part of, like it can't, like you will see in the canons of the Orthodox Church that Rome is number one, Constantinople is number two. It's first among equals. And what bothers us about the Catholic Church is that he forgot that among equals parts. But still, it is noteworthy that the Orthodox Church has never consecrated another bishop of Rome. We are waiting, like we still de facto recognize that the Pope is something, even if he's not really part of the church right now. And we're waiting, hoping that the Catholic Church will rectify their errors and come back to reunion with Orthodoxy. So just be aware of that. That the Catholics are wrong about the Pope, but they're half right. Yes.
But the Patriarch of Constantinople is now as what the Pope of Rome used to be, right?
Yeah, exactly. So there is a hierarchy in the ancient church, according to the canons of the Orthodox Church, whereby Rome was number one, Constantinople was number two, and then the next three are Alexandria, Jerusalem, and Antioch. I think in that order, although I could be wrong. So they're equal. The bishops are equals, but there is sort of a primacy of honor among them. But usually, historically, it just means who you had a right to appeal to. If things went wrong with your bishop, then you could send a complaint up to the higher bishop or whatever. That's how kind of that worked. But it's not like the bishops generally had authority to meddle in each other's affairs beyond that. Yes, Jackson.
What would the churches in Italy or Rome be under if there's no bishop of Rome?
Yeah, there's overlapping jurisdictions like there are in the States. So there's like 1 million Romanians in Italy, so they have their own jurisdiction there. Like quite literally more than 1 million Romanians in Italy. There's my wife has relatives in Italy, so they have their own jurisdiction. There's also a Greek jurisdiction, and then there's I think a Russian jurisdiction that might have come under the Greeks recently. So it's a mess. It's just a mess. But there's no among all of that, there's no Bishop of Rome, to my knowledge, which is different, say, than our relationship with the Coptics. The Copts actually do have their own Patriarch of Alexandria, and we have our own Patriarch of Alexandria, and we say ours is legitimate and theirs not. So that's interesting difference in terms of the relations between the churches. Yeah.
Not just that, but we have the Patriarch of Constantinople, but then the Armenians have their own Patriarch of Constantinople.
The Armenians have their own. Oh my gosh, they're copying everything we do. Oh goodness. Okay.
I also found the location for Constantinople was situated on a peninsula between the Golden Horn and the Sea of Marmara.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough.
Yeah, so it's the city of Constantinople is now Istanbul in Turkey, which is the major, and so very few Orthodox Christians there, sadly, but it's the seat of our highest bishop. That was actually relatively recent. I mean, the last major foothold of Orthodox Christians were driven out of Constantinople in the 50s, like when there were a bunch of riots. So we have at least one guy in this church who was born and raised in Constantinople.
Because the conquest from the Ottomans, it was already breached back in 1453.
You're absolutely right. Yeah. Yeah. So we lost it. We'll get it back, God willing, one day. But it's temporarily occupied at the moment. And it is really kind of wild because that was the greatest, city of the Greeks in history. And it's not even ours anymore. Greeks barely live in it. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I mean, Jerusalem being the greatest city of the Israelites, and then see what happens.
Right. Now it's just a mess. Oh my goodness. Now it's a mess. Although they semi got it back, which they played the long game, and we'll play the long game with Constantinople. Okay. But notice among the 12 apostles, there are 4 fishermen, 2 tax collectors, and 1 trader. This is not a high society bunch. No, there's no powerful people. There's no particularly wealthy or educated people. The tax collectors probably being the most educated of the set, but it's not clear that they have too much education beyond like literacy. And that's part of the pattern of God's work, of Jesus Christ's work. His power is made perfect in weakness, as St. Paul says. Or again, as he says in 1 Corinthians, he uses the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God brings about his mightiest works through humble people. And we see that again and again in the lives of the saints. St. Nectarios being a great example, an extremely, extremely humble bishop who allowed himself to be put through all kinds of stuff, really all kinds of slanders and accusations, but through him, God worked tremendous miracles, and now he's one of the greatest saints of the church. So this is, keep a lookout for patterns that have come up again in the scriptures, again and again. God working through humble people, God working through people who are not respectable in a worldly sense, but who nevertheless are an opportunity for God to manifest his greatness. Okay. Welcome, Hermione, and welcome, Sunny. Happy to have you guys. Sending out the 12. So we're in Gospel of Matthew chapter 10, verse 5. Jesus just named the 12 apostles. And now these 12 Jesus sent out and commanded them, saying, "Do not go into the way of the Gentiles, and do not enter into a city of the Samaritans, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And as you go, preach, saying, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Heal the sick, cleanse the lepers, raise the dead, cast out demons. Freely you have received, freely give. Provide neither gold nor silver nor copper in your money belts, nor bag for your journey, nor 2 tunics, nor sandals, nor staffs, nor for a worker is worthy of his food." Okay, there's a lot going on here, but remember, this is about the apostles historically, but we can see a basis for this for church governance in general. He's telling us something a little bit about how church leaders should be and how churches should be run. So do not go into the way of the Gentiles. That's one of the more, I think, striking things he says. Of course, there is this kind of Jewish exclusivism throughout the Old Testament, but now we're even seeing it in the New Testament. And what does it mean? Well, God ministered to his own people first, to the people he selected out of all other peoples first. Now he does open up his people to every human being, right? That's how all of us got here. I don't know that any of us here is of Jewish descent, but he opens up his work to all people. But he starts with the Israelites, and keep in mind, we just read a couple of stories in chapters 8 and 9 where Jesus healed Gentiles, where he healed Samaritans. So it's not that he's totally excluding these people. But one of the things he has to do is that the Jews had to have the first chance to receive Christ because God was faithful to them. God was faithful to the Israelites even when they were unfaithful to him. That's a theme that shows up again and again in the Bible. Even when God's own people betray him, he always comes to their rescue. He always defends them, protects them, and helps them, even when they reject him, even when they turn their backs on him. So this is another example of that. God is going to the children of Israel first and giving them priority, and in part so that they will have no excuse, in part so that they can't say, God preferred the Gentiles over us. That's why we didn't believe him. No, you very much had a chance, and of course some did repent and believe, but most didn't. But also just note in general that there is a model for this. This is talking about a model that we followed later on. Jacob, welcome. This is a model that gets followed later on. There's always been a sort of separateness in the history of Christianity. There's always been a sort of set apartness, of the church from the rest of the people. People often misinterpret that, and of course it's something we still practice in the Orthodox Church in this day. We don't intercommune with other people, even if they belong to some kind of Christian body. We don't recognize the sacraments. We don't recognize the holy orders of those other churches, because there's something distinct and set apart about the church. It's not because we reject other people. It's not because we dislike other people, but it's because what we have is from God, and that means it's holy, and holiness is by definition something that's set apart. So we accept other people, we love other people, but we don't mix in terms of doctrines and belief systems. And so when he's referring to the Gentiles and the Samaritans, Gentiles are pagans and the Samaritans are basically heretics. They're like Jews who have gone off. And we see a model of this in the Orthodox Church today, where we don't we love and embrace all people, but we don't mix our doctrine with or practice with paganism of any kind or heresy of any kind. We keep the church the church. And that's always marked the history of Christianity. That was the one thing the Romans hated most about Christianity, because they didn't mind, the Romans wouldn't mind adding one more god to their pantheon. They worship Zeus, they worship Artemis, they worship, why not throw Jesus in the mix? What would be wrong with that? The problem is that the Christians were worshiping Jesus to the exclusion of all other gods, to the exclusion of participation. And that's what really, and so it was this sort of exclusiveness, this sort of set apartness that caused the persecution of the Christians in the first place. But it's necessary in order to preserve the purity of the faith. Okay, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And that's Jesus's mercy and compassion, because remember now, of course, many Jews did believe in and follow Jesus, but the leadership of the house of Israel very adamantly rejected him. Right? The Pharisees rejected him, the Sadducees rejected him, virtually all the Jews in authority rejected him. And Jesus is still saying to his disciples, go to them and minister to them, help them, heal their sick, cast out their demons. So he is showing mercy, he's showing love, and that's a model for us too, right? If anyone mistreats us or something, we should still respond with kindness and with goodness. And as you go preach, saying the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Remember, this is from a prophecy all the way back in the Gospel of Daniel, chapter 7. But remember, while Daniel is a Jewish prophet living in Babylon during the time of the captivity, remember the Jews were taken away from Jerusalem and forced to live in Babylon, and he's asking, when are we going to be redeemed? Like, when are we going to be liberated from our oppressors? God, we're your chosen people, but now we're total captives in a pagan land. And one of the visions that God shows Daniel is that there's going to be this succession of 4 kingdoms represented by 4 beasts. And then after the 4th beast comes, it's going to be overtaken by a fifth kingdom, which is the kingdom of heaven. And where God in his I'm butchering the prophecy because I'm not seeing it in front of me. But basically, it's going to be after these 4 kingdoms, there's going to be a 5th kingdom. It's going to be the kingdom of heaven, and it's going to rule over all the earth, and it's going to establish the reign of God, and it's going to establish the reign of God's Messiah over all earth. And so when Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is hand, He's saying, hey, the prophecy's been fulfilled. The four kingdoms were what? The kingdom of Babylon, the Medo-Persian Empire, the Babylonian Empire, the Medo-Persian Empire, the Greek Empire, and then the Roman Empire. Now Jesus is saying, look, we're at number 4. Number 5 is right around the corner. And the number 5 is going to be the kingdom that Jesus himself established. So he's saying, when he's saying the kingdom of heaven is at hand, he's saying the prophecy of Daniel has been fulfilled. God is establishing his kingdom on earth. Now, of course, it's going to look like a very different kingdom that they expected. It's going to be a spiritual kingdom. It's going to be a heavenly kingdom. They were hoping for an earthly Israelite kingdom, and they get disappointed. Of course, what they get is infinitely better. But anyway, that's when Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is at hand. He's harkening back to Daniel chapter 7. Heal the sick, cleanse the lepers, raise the dead, cast out demons. Freely you have received, freely give. This is, a very important principle that what we receive in the church, what do we receive? We receive grace. We receive, what is grace? Grace is the presence and action of God. When we're baptized in the water, we receive God's grace. When we receive Holy Communion, we receive God's grace. In all of these instances, we are getting something from God for free, and we need to pass it on for free. The church can and never should pay charge for the sacraments. All right, that's a sin, the sin of simony. This is not something we should make money off of. The other miracles that happen in the church, whether they're healings, or for example, the icons that stream myrrh is a remarkable miracle in our days. They take them around totally for free. I mean, I think people voluntarily choose to support them. But you don't pay money to see it. You don't, when I went to them, they saw I was a priest. They handed me 2 little vials of the myrrh that was streaming out of the icon just because I was a priest. They didn't charge me for it or anything, because it's freely you've received, freely give. Now there was interesting. There was a parachurch group, Orthodox group in the 80s and 90s. They were not for real. They were not really part of the Orthodox Church, but they claimed to have a myrrh streaming icon, and it turned out to be later fraudulent. There are all kinds of other scandals there. But one of the first things you could tell that was weird about them is they were charging for the myrrh. You go there, and they'll give you this holy myrrh that's supposedly, but you better pay. And that should have been a tip off right away that was not from God. But there's this temptation in every era, right? This especially outside of the Orthodox Church, like those Joel Osteen types. I mean, you can make good money preaching the gospel. You can make good money doing quote unquote faith healings in the name of Jesus Christ. You can manipulate these sorts of things for financial gain. It's pretty easy, apparently, actually. And some people have really made quite a quick buck. I mean, Joel Osteen, Creflo Dollar. Who's the guy with the really blue eyes? Kenneth Copeland.
Yeah, Kenneth Copeland. That's exactly
These guys, they have private jets, they have mansions. So this is a real thing, and Jesus is, condemning right here, right now. Unfortunately, I've heard it happening in the Orthodox Church too. Not like in a systemic level, and I haven't encountered it, but I've heard it, of a bishop telling the priest, this was back in one of the old countries, where people are poor, saying like, hey, you give me a nice little kickback, and I'll give you a good parish. I'll make you. So it's a real shame, but this is a temptation that exists in every era, and it's a total sin. Provide neither gold nor silver from your money belts. And remember, this is an extension of Jesus' teaching on the Sermon on the Mount, right? So he originally told us, look at the lilies of the field. They're beautiful. God has made them beautiful, but they neither toil nor spin. They don't make their own clothing or anything. They trust God to provide. The birds of the air trust for God to provide their food. Now Jesus isn't telling us literally don't engage in agriculture, or don't, engage in clothes making, but it's just a more general lesson of trusting God to supply your needs. Now he's saying it more specifically to the leaders of the church, to trust in God to provide your needs. It's hard, but you have to. That's a model. We can't. And how terrible does it become if especially the leaders of the church are so anxious about money and trying to extract every red cent that we can, because we don't trust in God. That would hinder ministry. It would hinder the growth, the reputation of the church, and so on and so forth. But it happens. Nor bag for your journey, nor 2 tunics, nor sandals, nor staffs, for a worker is worthy of his food. Now, on the one hand, you see there's a sort of asceticism in this, right? the church leaders and all Christians are supposed to live simply, not with over reliance on, various material goods, and not in a self-indulgent way, and not over concerned about comfort. I mean, that's, wow, not even 2 tunics. I mean, now all of us have, multiple outfits, but probably in Jesus's day, this was quite literal. Not even have a second set of clothing. That's a very hard thing he's demanding. But I knew people like that in seminary. I had one friend who was a priest now. He's a holy priest, a really blessed man. But I remember in seminary, he had 3 sets of clothing, and I know because I went in his room and you could see all 3, and he and was lived that sort of life of self-discipline. There are people in this life who still live. Who, many of them end up becoming monks or nuns, but who live this sort of extreme asceticism, and they get spiritual results from it. They're weaker people like myself, but Lord have mercy. Okay. But on the other hand, on the one hand, this is a lesson in trusting in Christ. But on the other hand, notice that last part about the worker is worthy of his food. And this comes up in St. Paul too. On the other hand, there is this obligation to support the ministers of the gospel. You have to, and I know I'm saying that as one who's relying on your support. But there is this kind of sense in that people need to be, you need to support your priests and support your bishops in full-time ministry. It's a shame. And of course, it happens in a lot of countries that, priests and bishops, I don't know about bishops, but a lot of priests, they have to they have to have a full-time job and just do priesting, quote unquote, on the side because their congregations can support them. This is in countries where Orthodoxy is small, where the church is small. It's really unfortunate. And that's a shame because it prevents their ability to full-time minister to the sacraments, full-time minister to the people of God, spend their full time in prayer. So this is an obligation on the one hand to the ministers, but on the other hand, it's also saying something to the community. You have to be able to, you have to pony up. Come on. Yes. And that was something that St. Paul says in the, St. Paul did support himself through tent making so that he wouldn't be a burden on any of the communities he visited, and so that he wouldn't, be a cause for scandal, so no one could say he was just in it for the money. But nevertheless, he says, even though I did it this way, as regards other apostles and stuff, you have to support them. And that should make sense, right? That should make sense. You need people, there's kind of this idea, especially among like the communist type oriented, even though communism is pretty much dead. So this is, more in the olden days, but it's like, oh, you need to be involved in some kind of productive work. If you don't make something, well, then you're not really working. You're not contributing to society. And that's just not really true. People need all kinds of things. And now we kind of have a greater awareness because we're in like an information economy, and a lot of us do jobs that don't involve making anything. But it's just a more general principle that's true that people provide things beyond just physical construction. Yeah.
Brutalism.
Brutalism, it could be. I have not heard that term applied to it, but yeah, it could be. There was, just the old school communists and stuff, like, we're thinking like 100 years ago, were really like just concerned with productivity. They're all about factories and building things. And anyone who, wasn't really involved with that was, suspect, like managers and clergy, and anyone who had like, the bourgeoisie, who are the bourgeoisie? Well, basically the middle class. Anyone who was providing something like a service and was not like getting their hands down and dirty was potential parasite. That mindset pretty much doesn't exist anymore. But still, it's worth mentioning. Okay, now whatever city or town you enter, inquire who in it is worthy, and stay there till you go out. And when you go into a household, greet it. If the household is worthy, let your peace come upon it. But if it is not worthy, let your peace return to you. And whoever will not receive you nor hear your words when you depart from that house or city, shake off the dust from your feet. Assuredly, I say to you, it will be more tolerable in the land for the land of Sodom and Gomorrah in the day of judgment than for that city. Okay, so remember, these are more general principles that apply to the church at large, but the specific context is he is talking to the apostles who are going to be involved in itinerant preaching. Like that means, what does itinerant preaching mean? It means they're going from town to town preaching things. And so the first thing he says is, when you get to a city or town, inquire who is worthy. On the one hand, Jesus got away with dealing with getting in close contact with tax collectors and prostitutes and so on. He was untouched by that because he was Jesus. He helped them. I think for others, it's a little messier. I think it would be a lot more suspect if your average priest was hanging out with prostitutes all the time. That would be that would raise more questions. Of course, you have to minister to those people. You have to show them kindness, and God willing, bring them to repentance. But it would be a little bit different, you understand, for a mere mortal. So you have to be careful. You know, just in general, a priest has to, or a minister of the gospel in general, someone who, you know, works for the church, has to be careful about who they associate with and what kind of reputation they cultivate. It does matter. We do accept everyone. We do welcome everyone, but you know, don't be an idiot. But also, just in order to don't bother your time. Don't bother wasting your time with people who are unserious, or people who are not going to accept the message, or who are you know, not going to take these teachings seriously. You know, we have a obligation to offer the gospel to all people, but if they don't accept it, you know, if they're not ready for it, if they can't live by it, then, you know, that's that. And stay there till you go out. What's that about staying there till you go out? Well, I mean, this is, you know, on one hand, talking about a physical necessity, right? The disciples, as they're traveling around, they need a place to live. We don't really do that exactly anymore. Like, I have my own house. I don't stay with any of you. And our bishops don't either, God forbid. But I don't know who that would be worse for. Would it be worse for the bishop or for you? But say that you got, but just in general, you know, don't look to hop around. Jesus is saying, don't hop around from house to house, seeing where you could have it better. You know, don't always try to, you know, it's like, oh, I like the food here, but maybe over there it's even nicer. You know, go one place and stick with it. And I think, you know, one of the things, again, this stuff applies to Christians in general, but obviously it's more directed to the leadership. And one of the things I think is, as a priest, you know, I shouldn't seek to be looking around at different churches, because openings do pop up from time to time. It's like, oh, you know, there's an opening at this or that church, and oh, they might pay more. Oh, it might be a bigger community. Oh, you might have more, you know, stuff to do, more accommodations, and so on and so forth. No, stay where you're at unless you have a really strong reason to leave. Is a good principle. And in general, you know, but what does the lay Christian have to take with that? Well, just in general, this can apply to your life more generally. Don't always be seeking greener grass. You know, what is it? It's kind of a cheesy slogan, but, you know, grow where you're planted, right? If God put you where you are right now, he did it for a reason. And unless things become terribly unbearable, don't just be seeking to move on to bigger and better things all the time. If you're in Roanoke or Blacksburg or wherever you are, don't seek to leave there unless you have a good reason to. God put you there for a reason. You know, and we can always imagine the grass is always greener, but it's often a delusion. You know, especially, God forbid, you see it with married people. I mean, I think that's one of the most dangerous delusions a married person could have. It's like, okay, I have it all right with my husband, or I have it all right with my wife, but oh, if I were with such and such person, things could be even better. You know, and that's a lie that the devil sows in your minds to destroy your marriage, destroy your family, because, you know, you get to the next one and then you have problems there too. Stay there till you go out, you know. And when you go into a household, greet it. If the household is worthy, let your peace come upon it. But if it's not worthy, let your peace return to you. This has always been a puzzling statement. You know, what does it mean? Is he talking about, like, physically giving them kind of like, yes?
Would the statement you made before be applied to, like, not making a statement on the other side of it?
Yeah.
Like, people are like, oh, my country sucks, I gotta immigrate to, like, the USA because I'm smart.
Yeah.
My country sucks. It
Yeah.
should, like, would the biblical view be like, don't abandon your people, like, actually stay where you've been put and born, and, like, improve from there?
I was going to ask a question similarly to, you know, something like that, but I mean, Father kind of answered that when he said, unless you have a good reason to. So if the
Right.
reason's good, then
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
if
in
it's
general,
one,
yeah. I mean, yeah. Without.
I mean, like, of course, if there's, like, persecution, but, like, if you're just, like,
Right.
oh, I'm poor, but
I think in general, yeah, that principle always holds. You know, if you are just seeking gain, that's problematic. If you have a good reason to leave, then leave. But yes, just for the shine. I mean, I'll say in the case of Greece, it's been, you know, that sort of emigration has been hugely problematic. You know, Greece has experienced what we call brain drain, which, you know, I heard it. You know, Greece is a small country, and I've heard, you know, what's the number one export of Greece? Hardworking Greeks. It's a real shame. It's a tragedy for Greece. You know, a lot. I think the country would be a lot better off if a lot of our most successful, most talented, most intelligent people stayed there. But anyway, that's a different point. You know, and sometimes the country itself incentivizes them to leave. But yeah, what can you do? But yeah. And when you go into a household, greet it. If the household is worthy, let your peace come upon it. But if it's not worthy, let your peace return to you. Your peace is your you know, Saint Theophylact of Ocrid says it's a blessing. You know, the goodness of God, the grace of God that radiates through the apostles or whatever. Let it come on them. But if it's not worthy, let your peace return to you. And what we get from this is, you know, don't infinitely accommodate bad behavior or mediocrity in a church setting. You know, in the church, we put up with a lot of sin. We accept a lot of people and we forgive them. But there is a sort of point where if people are just, you know, constantly causing problems or constantly not refusing to get right, then there's a point where you do you know, let your peace return to you, right? You don't infinitely accommodate everything, because then you know, the church would not get anywhere. Like we, you know, the church you know, supports a lot of people when they're having hard times. You know, our Philoptochos Society is great. A lot of people run into issues. They can give out some money and really handle some hefty bills from time to time, but it's the purpose of that is not just to pay your rent for the rest of your life or something, right? There's it's yeah.
Would that apply to, like, I mean, like in your case, like doing confessions, like besetting sins? Like if you have someone who's confessing like the same exact thing over and over and over again, like how
Yeah, depending on what the sin is,
Mhm.
and you have to use nuance. But it's a really good question. Yeah, after a certain point, you know, you have to say if you're unwilling to change, then get out of here. And I have heard priests say that specifically with the sin of adultery. If you come confess the sin of adultery, you're actually not supposed to read the prayer of confession of absolution over them until they've gone out and ended that relationship or whatever, and then come back. And so yeah, after if people, but it depends on the sin, right? I mean, there's some people who are dealing with habitual or addictive behaviors. You really need to just keep hearing their confession, because that's often helping them get through it and lifting them up, and it's not just a case of them being obstinate, you know. So yes, it does apply in confession, but case by case basis very much.
Right.
There's some situations where you really need to accommodate people a ton, and in other cases where they're just being lazy, or they're just being self-indulgent, or they're just, yeah. But if it is not worthy, let your peace return to you. And whoever will not receive or hear your words when you depart from that house or city, shake off the dust from your feet. So this just like let your peace return to you. It's appropriate to give up in some circumstances. You know, we're supposed to share the gospel with everybody. We're supposed to offer a helping hand to everybody. But not infinitely. If people are not accepting it, or they're not wanting to get their act together, there is a certain point after which you shake off the dust from your feet. And you say, okay, well, I tried, I did my best, and maybe if you're willing to change your attitude, you know, you can come back. But the church does not exist to enable people. Our faith does not exist to enable people. So it's important. Assuredly, I say to you, it will be more tolerable for the land of Sodom and Gomorrah on the day of judgment than for that city. Of course, we're talking general principles. Now, there is also a specific context when he's talking about specifically, you know, the apostles living in certain places. And people not, you know, accepting the God. He's talking about people who do not accept the gospel or do not accept the apostles themselves. Now it'll be more tolerable in the land for the land of Sodom and Gomorrah on the day of judgment for that city. So those who are offered Christ and reject him will be more severely judged, right? If you had an opportunity to believe the truth, if you had the opportunity to accept the gospel, if you had the opportunity to worship the one true God, and you chose to reject it the way these people reject it, and notice, rejecting the apostles is to reject God. To reject the church is to reject God. That's important. These things are part of a package deal, because the church is God's body on earth. It's the executor of God's will on earth. But you know, those those who consciously reject God will be more severely punished. Those and those who are punished in this life will be less so in the next, according to the fathers commented on this passage. So Sodom and Gomorrah got punished in this life. I mean, God called down a fire from heaven which destroyed these cities, and apparently there's actually archaeological evidence for this at the former sites of Sodom and Gomorrah, which are now uninhabited, that they were destroyed in some fiery cataclysm, some 3,000-ish years ago.
Which pretty much lines up with.
Yeah, exactly. So archaeology can't quote unquote prove a miracle, but it can be totally consistent with one, right? So they were destroyed by some kind of fiery cataclysm. Now, what was their sin? Their sin was partly, as we know, from the strange and sexual practices they engaged in that city, right? The term sodomy has become associated primarily with homosexuality in the modern day, but it was really a more general term for all abnormal sex acts. And that was part of the reason these cities were destroyed. They were just so self-indulgent, they were so completely debauched that they couldn't be redeemed. But another part of it, and it's important in the Gospel of Ezekiel, is that it was their inhospitality. They did not welcome the angels that went and visited them, but instead, wanted to do all kinds of nasty things to them. And that's another reason. And so this is talking about, the people who are not being hospitable to the apostles when they go to them, they're going to be judged for that the way Sodom and Gomorrah were judged, and even worse. So, be good to your priest. Be good. Be good to the people who come, preaching the gospel, preaching preaching on behalf of the church, people who are doing the Lord's work. Doesn't mean, again, they're bad priests. They're people who are working on behalf of the church who are themselves misbehaved, and you should reject them, and you should put them away, and you should not help them. But you should give people who work for the church at least a little bit of grace, a little bit of hospitality. Okay.
I think that's also when you said about orientation, and I think there's also a term where you got to really emphasize in today's world about disgusting acts. I mean, everything is completely non-consensual. I've always heard the saying, no means no. Without consent, it's sexual assault. And that's absolutely true in any standards. Like if you're in a relationship, you got to learn when is it okay to raise a family and when is it not okay. Right. If they say no, you need to respect their wishes and respect their privacy at all times.
Yeah, right, absolutely. And that was one of the sins of Sodom, among the many others, was rape. It was a sin, it was wrong, and absolutely. Okay, so verse 16, behold, I send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves, therefore be wise as serpents and harmless as doves, but beware of men, for they will deliver you up to councils and scourge you in their synagogues. You will be brought before governors and kings for my name's sake as a testimony to them and to the Gentiles. But when they deliver you up, do not worry about how or what you should speak, for it will be given to you in that hour what you should speak. For it is not you who speak, but the Spirit of your Father who speaks in you. Okay, so behold, I send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. And that really is an interesting statement. I think, characterizes a lot of the interactions with Christians in the broader world. Christians can appear more naive, more innocent, and the world is very, very practiced at being the world. The world is a vicious place. The world is not a kind place. The world is not a forgiving place. And yet we're supposed to be out there being gentle and kind and forgiving, even when our surroundings are not necessarily gentle and kind and forgiving. And we're going out, as Jesus is saying, I am going out, you're going out there and you're going to be vulnerable. You're going to be sheep facing wolves. Sheep lose that battle 9 out of 10 times, if not 10 out of 10 times. But therefore be as wise as serpents and harmless as doves. So we need to embody the gentleness of the sheep. We need to embody that kindness. We need to embody that mercy. But at the same time, we shouldn't be stupid about it. We shouldn't be naive. We still need to have the serpent's wisdom, even if we don't have the serpent's venom. We need to understand. We need to be aware that people will try to take advantage of our kindness and gentleness. People will try to push us into compromising situations when we're following the gospel. People will try to wrong us. And while we need to be patient with that and we need to endure what comes our way, at the same time, we shouldn't just turn ourselves into punching bags. That's not the point of of being a Christian. But beware of men, for they will give you up to councils and scourge you in their synagogues. This is something that very literally happened to the apostles, and this is just the history of Christianity. Christianity, everywhere and at all times has been persecuted in some capacity. Now, there are better times and worse times. I would certainly say we're not persecuted in the United States in 2025 the way we were in Russia in 1917 or in the Islamic Empire in 650. But still, it's a reality, and it will come and go. Someone will be in power who's favorable to Christianity. Someone will come later who's not favorable, and this is part of it. And this is something we need to endure. And again, without hatred, without just tolerating everything, but at the same time without hatred, without bitterness. And accepting our fate as part of the will of God. This was part of God's providence in the world. When God set up the whole world, when he sent us out into the world, he knew that this would happen to us. He knew that this was part of the deal. And he never lets anything happen to us that he didn't himself willingly endure. Remember. So that doesn't always make it easier, but or it doesn't always make the pain go away, but it should make it in some respects easier, that he suffers with us. You'll be brought before governors and kings for my sake as a testimony to them and the Gentiles. So what is he saying? It's part of my plan that you're going to be persecuted. In fact, I want you to be imprisoned. I want you to be beaten. I want you to suffer these tortures in a certain degree, because this will be a time for witness. This will be a time for you to bear witness to the reality of Christ, to the truth of the gospel. There's a lot of really beautiful. Of course, we have the early testimonies of the martyrs. In their Roman world, how many martyrs converted the people around them, how many of St. Catherine, who we celebrated yesterday, how many of her persecutors were converted to Christ because of just her living example. But we have more recent examples from I was reading recently about St. Gabriel of Georgia, the country of Georgia, was part of the Soviet Union. He was tortured terribly in prison, but after a little while, sometimes his captors would come to talk to him and want to hear about the gospel and stuff. Father George Calciu in Romania, similar thing. Under the communist regime, he was terribly persecuted. They put him in a cell with two psychopaths in the hopes that they couldn't kill him directly because there was too much. Father George Calciu was known for being a political prisoner. He was a priest in communist Romania, and he was, arrested for his preaching because it was an atheist government at the time. And so they couldn't kill him outright because there was international pressure in the United States that says, you can't execute your people for this. Yada yada. So they put him in a cell with two psychopaths in the hopes that they would kill him. And then the two psychopaths ended up being converted and becoming Christians. And this is in recent times. This was in the 70s and 80s. So this is part of God's plan, because why? God, it's hard to accept, but God sent him into that prison. Part of him being there was to convert those two men who were so far gone. They were both murderers. They'd both committed heinous crimes, and yet God wanted to rescue them. And part of it was by allowing one of his priests to go to prison. So it's very interesting, but this is part of God's plan. But when they deliver you up, do not worry about how or what you should speak, for it will be given to you in that hour what you should speak. Now, this is something that I've seen abused many times. I've seen many priests say, I'm not going to prepare a sermon because the Holy Spirit will just speak through me. That works if you have the spirituality of the apostles. If you there are some holy priests and lay people who can just, everything they say is golden. Like their mouth just overflows with the Holy Spirit. Don't use this as a template if you're not at that level, okay? Prepare, if you have to talk to someone, know your stuff. If you're going to preach the gospel, be knowledgeable. Don't just, it is not an excuse to be lazy. For it is not who you speak, but the Spirit of who your Father speaks in you. Nevertheless, it is true. Another one, great example from Father George Calciu. When he was in prison one time, there was one of the prison guards who would savagely beat the prisoners, and he would go through his shift and he'd beat every single one of them. He said it was the worst thing in the world. Even worse than being beaten yourself was hearing the people in the other cells being beaten around you, because you knew it was coming for you, but you also wanted to take their pain away. And it was really, really just an awful experience. But one day it was Easter, it was Pascha, and he knew it was Pascha. He was aware of it somehow. And that terrible guard came. And when the guards come in, you're supposed to be naked, hands against the wall, really humiliating. But for some reason, he just felt inspired by the Holy Spirit. Instead of turning and facing the wall, he faced the guard, which, would have got him extra beatings or whatever. But instead, he just said, Christ is risen. Christos enviat. And the guard was totally stunned. And he didn't know what to say. He looked at the other guards and said, Adevrat enviat. Truly he's risen. And then walked out of the cell and didn't beat anyone that whole shift. And then Father George in the cell had this great, after the guard left, he saw the uncreated light of God shine and radiate. It was a beautiful, like powerful mystical experience. It was really incredible. But it was the Holy Spirit that spoke to him. In that moment, he just gave him the words to say, and it was so powerful, touched the guard's heart at that moment. So in the Orthodox Church, we're living what the apostles lived. I mean, not me personally, in the sense I'm not doing these great works, but just all of us are invited to participate in that same grace. Anywho, yes.
You said through that shift, like, so did he
I
continue?
actually can't remember, or it might have been he never did again.
Okay.
This is in the book, Father, or maybe he stopped being a guard there. I can't remember, to tell you the truth.
Okay.
Yeah,
I was just wondering if those words were like just a grace period.
It might have been.
Until
It's certainly possible. It was just a grace period, and then he came back worse than before. I don't remember. It's in Father George Calciu. It's like Calciu. It's like calcium without the M at the end. Calciu. He talked about this he's talked about. Oh, he's passed away now, but you can read this online. You can find it in his book. Yeah, you can see. Okay, we'll stop here. Verse 20. Questions, comments, concerns, thoughts, feelings? Yes.
You had said earlier that it's good to help people who need help, but don't be like overly associated with like the very low ends of society, like you said, prostitutes and such.
Right.
To what extent is that? Because like Saint Vitalis was entirely known for visiting brothels constantly to help convert prostitutes.
That is a beautiful and unique ministry that he had at that point in time. If we had a lot of widespread brothels here in Roanoke, I would send some women from our church to go deal with that. I think, obviously, and then hopefully they'd come into the church and I'd hear their confession, but I personally would not go. At least in this day and age, that would be too many problems with that. So we'd want the saving. Of course, now things are different. I know prostitution still happens, but I don't even think there are brothels anymore. I don't really know. I haven't checked. But how we would minister to these people would be different in this day and age than it would be then. But yeah, at least in this context, definitely it would be a task for women in the church to do, and not for the men.
Oh, I could see Beth going.
You could see Beth going. She's a good woman. She's a blessed woman with a beautiful heart. There's another female saint, Saint Theodora of Byzantium, the Empress of Byzantium. She herself was a former prostitute, and she started houses. I guess they were kind of like convents to reform prostitutes, because I think in these more primitive, more poor, more ancient societies, prostitution was more widespread than at least it appears to be in modern America.
Yeah, digital prostitution.
Yeah, it's changed forms. I don't even know how you go out and minister to people like that, but may God help them, and I'm sure many of them do find Christ in their own way, in their own path. Anastasia, you raising your hand?
Yes, it was Archbishop Yakovos in the 80s that gave permission for Thanksgiving.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you. Yeah. Okay, well, we're following. And now that's on the recording, so it's good. Okay. All right. Lord, not let your servant depart in peace, according to your word, for my eyes have seen your salvation, which you have prepared in the presence of all peoples, light for revelation to the Gentiles and glory for your people Israel. Amen. Okay, God bless you guys. I'll stop the recording now.